Did you ever notice that EarthBound looks almost silly on purpose but feels devastating almost by accident? It's the game with the weird enemies and the crooked smile, the rolling HP meter, the alien final boss that looks like a nightmare. And somehow all of that exists in the same world as bike rides and hamburgers and homesickness and calling your mom. That's the hidden genius of EarthBound. It doesn't just tell a story, it disguises one. At first glance, EarthBound looks almost unserious. The world is bright and rounded and playful, and your weapon might be a baseball bat. You fight dogs, you fight hippies and traffic signs, and you fight piles of puke, and you fight things that feel like they escaped from a child's sketchbook after eating too much sugar. It's absurd, it's cheerful, and it's awkward. And that is exactly why the game's artistic expression hits so hard. Because EarthBound builds a world that feels safe enough for innocence, so it can slowly show you how fragile innocence really is. This is not fantasy in the traditional sense. There are no castles, no noble bloodlines, and no chosen one speeches. Instead, there are suburbs, there are drugstores and hotels, and sidewalks and arcades and buses. The setting feels ordinary enough that when something becomes strange, it feels invasive, like corruption entering everyday life. And that is one of EarthBound's great artistic choices. It turns the familiar into the uncanny. The art style of EarthBound is deceptively simple, not primitive and not under-designed. It's deceptively simple. Everything is exaggerated just enough to feel like a memory, like the world as a kid might remember it. Adults are a little odd, cities feel huge, danger is surreal, and evil doesn't always look evil at first. Even the battle backgrounds feel less like locations and more like emotional states. They pulse and they warp and spin and blur reality into something psychological. You're not just fighting monsters, you're fighting mood. You're fighting fear, confusion, and alienation. And that matters because EarthBound often communicates through feeling before explanation. It doesn't always stop and tell you what something means. It lets you sit inside the sensation of it. That's art direction doing narrative work. A lot of people remember EarthBound as that weird, funny RPG. And it is funny. It genuinely is funny. But the humor isn't just flavor, it's camouflage. The comedy lowers your guard. It makes the world feel eccentric instead of threatening. It teaches you not to brace yourself. So when the game suddenly becomes lonely or eerie or emotionally raw, you feel it more. That's why EarthBound's tone is so special. It doesn't separate the goofy from the profound. It lets them exist together, just like childhood does. When you're young, the world is ridiculous and terrifying at the same time. It's a joke at lunch, it's a panic at night, a cartoon in the afternoon, and existential fear before bed. EarthBound understands that emotional whiplash in a way very few games do. Underneath all the weirdness, EarthBound is about something painfully human. What does it mean growing up without becoming spiritually hollow? Ness begins as just a kid in a neighborhood, not a king, not a prophecy machine, just a kid asked to carry something way too big. And that's the emotional engine of the whole game. Because growing up often feels exactly like that. You leave the familiar, you meet people who shape you, you learn that the world is stranger, sadder, and more beautiful than you thought. And somewhere along the way, you realize comfort doesn't come with you automatically. You have to rebuild it. That's why little details matter so much in EarthBound. Calling home, homesickness, sleeping at hotels, checking in with your dad through a phone call instead of a heroic cutscene. These mechanics are so easy to overlook, but they're not just cute details. They're the game insisting that emotional maintenance matters. Strength is not just offense and defense. Strength is staying connected to love, to family, to ordinary life, to selfhood. That may be the quietest and most radical theme in the entire game. So let's talk about homesickness, because in almost any other RPG, this mechanic would be cut immediately. It's inconvenient, it interrupts combat, it makes your hero less efficient, which is exactly why it's brilliant. EarthBound refuses the fantasy that emotional detachment is strength. Ness is not stronger because he suppresses vulnerability. He gets better when he acknowledges it. That's such a small design choice, but it completely changes how the game sees heroism. In many RPGs, the hero becomes more powerful by transcending ordinary human needs. In EarthBound, the hero stays human, and that humanity is the point. It's not a weakness, it's the point. That is one of the game's hidden themes. To survive darkness, you don't become less sensitive. You protect the part of yourself that can still feel. And then there's Giygas, or maybe more accurately, whatever Giygas becomes, because by the end of EarthBound, the game stops presenting evil as something cleanly understandable. It becomes abstract and formless, chaotic, almost pre-linguistic. Giygas doesn't feel like a villain with a plan. He feels like trauma without shape. He feels like hatred after it's burned through identity, like suffering so intense it can no longer explain itself. That's why the final confrontation feels so different from a standard RPG climax. You're not just defeating a bad guy, you're staring into something incomprehensible, something ancient, wounded, and contagious. And artistically, that's where EarthBound becomes extraordinary, because the whole game has trained you to expect weirdness and comedy. And then, at the very end, it reveals that weirdness can also be terror. It's the same language, but it's a different truth. The ending of EarthBound might be one of the most beautiful thematic payoffs in gaming, because the final victory does not come from stats, or from gear, or from some final super move. It comes from prayer, from reaching outward, from connection, from the accumulated presence of other people. That's an astonishing choice. In a genre obsessed with power escalation, EarthBound ends by saying the thing that saves the world is not domination. It's compassion, memory, relationship, hope held collectively. And suddenly, everything clicks. The phone calls, the homesickness, the small towns, the kindness of strangers, the ridiculous humor, the tenderness hiding beneath all the oddity. The game has been building to this the entire time. Its deepest message is that love is not separate from the struggle. Love is the only thing that makes the struggle survivable. EarthBound still feels modern because so many games are still catching up to what it understood. That art can be playful and unsettling, that mechanics can express emotional truth, that a story can be funny without becoming shallow, that childhood isn't just nostalgia. It's a lens of looking at fear, alienation, and hope. And maybe most importantly, that sincerity is not embarrassing. EarthBound is sincere in a way that feels almost dangerous. It believes in kindness. It believes in vulnerability, and it believes ordinary human connection matters more than spectacle. And it does all of that while being one of the weirdest games ever made. That's not a contradiction. That's a masterpiece. So, yes, EarthBound is quirky, it's funny, it's bizarre, it's full of aliens and abstract horror and offbeat humor, but underneath all of that is a game about what it costs to stay gentle in a brutal world. A game about growing up without letting cynicism hollow you out. A game about how fear distorts reality and how love, however small, pulls it back into shape. That's why EarthBound lingers. Not because it's strange, but because it understands something true. Sometimes the most powerful art doesn't scream its meaning. Sometimes it hides it in a child's bedroom, a phone call home, and a prayer at the end of the world. So, what hidden theme in EarthBound hits you the hardest? Feel free to tell me in the comments, and if you like this essay, why not like and even subscribe and hit the bell button even if you want more gaming content like this. As you might be able to tell, EarthBound has a very special place in my heart. It's probably one of the fondest gaming memories I have growing up. Coming back to it now as an adult with more perspective, it makes me appreciate the things about it that I completely overlooked back in the day. I guess some gems are just like that.